the independence of the United States and the process that initiated that, and just some specifics about the Declaration of Independence, which if you haven't read it, you probably should. Anyway, so 1776 was very important because the English colonists figured out a key move. They figured out that if they created a nation, created the United States, rather than being ruled by the European colonies, then that nation, the United States, could take land from the Native Americans, from other countries. They could have the political power that the British Empire had over them, as well as their own political power, and they could make profits rather than the British Empire profiting from them, which was the current stand. So you have to forgive me, I am going to kind of jump around here. It's been a while since I've talked about history with you, so I'm trying to get back in the swing of things. As you know, history is something I'm really passionate about, and it tends to repeat itself. So with this idea of creating a nation, they were able to create an effective system of national control that would later be used by future leaders. It's still being used today. At that time, there were a lot of black rebellions occurring, and there were riots, farmers, different settlers, different things like that. And someone figured out, oh, let's direct all of this tension towards England. Let's say that we need to be free from them. And there were a couple different reasons for the colonists to be mad about the English and British rule. So one reason was the Proclamation of 1763. And this proclamation by the British said, hey, once you get past the Appalachian Mountains, you cannot mess with the Indians. They are out of bounds to the whites, so they're safe there. And that was a problem because colonists wanted to expand in that land. Now, the English were kind of on the side of the Indians, so the rivals of the settlers, or the soon-to-be American colonists, were, of course, the English and the Indians, now that the French and Indian War has come to an end. Now, the other thing is that the colonial trade going on here in this new colony, or new colonies, was very, very valuable to England. It was what they were using to pay for the war that they had against the French. And this was another thing used for the conflict, that our trade here was making them so much money. So that was another thing they used to get those people that were already amped up, already rebelling, already rioting, to see, oh, England is the enemy, let's break free from them, let's declare all of this, which is where we're going to down the timeline. So those were two major sources of the conflict, and because of that, America wanted less English rule. Now, don't forget the Stamp Act. You can kind of count that as a third source of the conflict. And after the demonstration on November 1st, 1765, rich people set up armed patrols, and they kind of like got together this little rebellion type thing, which ended up repealing the Stamp Act because of the overwhelming resistance. Fourth thing against the British was the quartering of troops. This is in the not the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, which is an amended to the Constitution, so I guess you could say it's in our Constitution today, that we cannot be forced to quarter troops. This is why, because this was done. England, British, had their troops living in the houses of American colonists, soon to be Americans, of the colonists, and they took their jobs at a time when jobs were already scarce. So that is actually what led to the Boston Massacre, which I'm sure you probably already heard was not really much of a massacre. It was something that was blown out of proportion. Lots of people marched for these lives that were lost because of the British taking over the jobs during a time of limited jobs anyways. So they had got into it with the soldiers. They provoked the soldiers, and then next thing you know, Crispus Attucks was shot by one of the soldiers, and a couple other people were shot. I think that it was like 6 people that were killed. Boston Massacre. But by the soldiers. So that there was the 4th tipping point of leading us into the Revolutionary War. Now, for a minute, let's talk about Thomas Paine, because he made the Common Sense pamphlets in 1776. This was the first pamphlet that was arguing that we needed our independence. And he said, you know, hey, they have involved us in so many wars. We've lost so many lives because of this. We've lost lots of money. And he made an emotional appeal. Like, it is time to part our ways. It's time to separate from their rule and have our own. So those were some of the leading events that got us to becoming determined to declare our independence, which, by the way, Congress, American Congress, United States Congress, had adopted the Declaration of Independence on July 2nd, 1776. And that wasn't even when really we started recognizing ourselves as independent, because back in North Carolina and a couple other places, starting May 1776, they said British law is null, it's void, it doesn't mean anything, we're not following it, we're our own country, because we were already in the works of all of this. And the reason we celebrate on July 4th is because that is when it was proclaimed that we were independent. So now I just want to take a moment to look at a couple of my resources that I have here. If you have a chance to take a look at A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, it's a pretty good informative book, tells about history from a different perspective, and it is where I get some of my information from. So I would like to tell you a couple things that I have marked about in here. And so this is about when we were writing the Declaration of Independence. Well, not we, when Thomas Jefferson was writing the Declaration of Independence, 4th of July. He included in there, like, hey, you know, it's necessary for us to disconnect with you guys. And he said, we are declaring independence, but we're declaring the causes. We're declaring why we've got to this point, why we feel this way. So here's a quote. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute a new government. So that was how we became a country. People didn't like the government. People didn't like the rule of the British. People didn't like what was going on over here because of the English rule, the king, the monarchs. So we declared ourselves the right to abolish their government from ruling over us. And then he went on to list the grievances against the king. So he's basically saying, like, you guys have repeatedly objected our establishment, and saying that you're dissolving our colonial government, you're controlling judges, you're sending swarms of officers to harass our people, you're sending in armies to occupy us without our permission, you're cutting off trade with other parts of the world, you are taxing us insanely without our consent. And essentially, you are waging war against others, armies of foreign mercenaries, and causing a lot of death and desolation and tyranny. So basically, we don't want to be a part of this anymore because of what's going on here. So I am now going to turn over and take a few minutes to just read the Declaration of Independence. I'm actually going to make this a separate video, so follow up on this next video if you would like to hear the Declaration of Independence. It probably would take me 15 minutes. It's not that long, probably even less time than that. I'm not going to add any commentary. I'm just going to read it, share it with you. This other book here, Give Me Liberty, is a good book. It is by Eric Foner. He has 2 volumes. Unfortunately, I only have volume 2, not volume 1, but volume 1 is focused more on the independence time frame of the United States, when we were declaring that, when we were first starting off as a country. This part of the book that I have here has the Declaration of Independence, which is why I'm referencing it, but it starts from 1865 and goes on from there. So thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and I hope to see you soon.